Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today we are doing another tier list. This time we are doing a tier list of all of the nations, major and minor. So this idea came to me earlier today when somebody told me that France is the worst nation in the game, to which I responded, well no it isn't, and then I thought to myself, well what is? And where does France place relative to other nations? So that is how I came up with this video, and we're going to walk through it today, and I'll present my thoughts on what the current tier list in ranked of the nations is in the current patch as of April 8th, 2023. So let's get into the tier list.
What a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back KARDS world champion!
Alright, so to begin with, I'm going to put a very, very big disclaimer at the beginning of this tier list. All nations are playable at a competitive level, and this is not a draft tier list. So when you go into draft, you get to pick between 3 nations to start your deck, and then later you'll get to pick between 3 nations as your ally. This is not a draft tier list. If you want a draft tier list, you're going to need to go somewhere else, because this is not a draft tier list. I do not play a lot of draft, and I am sure draft is very, very different than ranked. And second of all, this is not to say, like, oh, you shouldn't play X nation because I put it bottom, or you should only play Y nation because I put it first. One, this is very patch specific, so if you're watching this video in the future, it's probably completely not relevant, and I might do an updated version every major patch. And two, there is... All decks are viable at a highest competitive level, and most certainly all decks are viable at a casual level if you just want to hit Field Marshal every month or whatever it is. You really don't need to think about this too much beyond just what nations are maybe don't need any more love and what nations could use a little extra love. Maybe what nations could use a little bringing back down to the rest of the crowd. So there's a few metrics which I want to go with in terms of measuring how good a nation is. It's not just how good are their cards, because that's a very, very simple metric. It's going to be a combination of how good are their elites, which would be the reason to play that as the major nation, like the main nation in a deck. 2, how many viable archetypes does the deck adequately support, both as a major or a minor nation, because if a deck supports exclusively one archetype, and it's really, really good, but exclusively in one archetype, then it's going to rank pretty low on my list, because it's not a particularly good nation, that's just a particularly good deck. So yeah, those are the metrics by which I'm going to measure it. Now obviously the minor nations, France, Italy, and Poland, are in a little of an awkward spot because they do not have elite nations or cards. They cannot be major nations, so they are therefore limited onto the number of decks they can fit into. So obviously they're not going to place first. However, they're not going to place last, because I'm going to start off this tier list by putting Japan down in C tier. I don't think there's any D tier nations at the moment. I think every nation is viable, and as I said, I think every nation is viable, so many people are probably surprised to see Japan here, because if you've ever played on ladder, you have most certainly played against, if not Feigned Retreat Jaguar, which is the most competitive Jaguar list out there, and sees regular play in tournaments, and has won numerous tournaments. You've also probably seen a lot of just sort of homebrew, casual, free-to-play Jaguar lists with expansions, maybe expand the Empire, or whatever that card's called. But the reason I'm putting Japan down here is Japan as a ally nation essentially does not exist, because Japan offers almost nothing. Now, I am saying almost nothing. The big caveat there is obviously Britain, Japan, Air, which is arguably the best deck in the game. However, I don't think that's a very new position, and I don't think that's a deck that's going to necessarily stick around. I would be shocked if Aichi continued to exist in its current form without ever getting a nerf in the future. And air superiority is good, but it's good in a very, very specific archetype, and in that archetype, it's easily replaceable if another nation offers something more. Japan, at this point, is just the most helpful ally, except that's just because all of the other allies have been kind of nerfed into the dirt in terms of what they offer to Brit Air. And other than Brit Air, you're not running Japan for control. You're not running Japan for its aggro. That's exclusively in Japan main. I mean, in Allied Japan, you're not running like German Japan, U.S. Japan, where you're picking Japan for the cavalry regiments. And inside Japan, I mean, you kind of have like Japan France still. You kind of have Japan Poland control. You kind of have Japan Britain Air, which I think is a joke deck. I know it's been brought to a couple tournaments, but I think that deck is laughably bad. So, yeah, that's the reason I'm putting Japan down in C tier. It just doesn't have a lot of support outside of Feigned Retreat Jagro, and even that deck relies entirely on Germany as an ally, and you have no flexibility in what you can do with that deck. And outside of that, not a lot. Then, we'll get on to B tier. Japan is the only C tier nation. We are going to have Poland. So, this might be surprising as well, because Legions is a very strong archetype. However, Legions is the only archetype. I mean, they have the Exile decks. They recently changed a lot of those Exile air cards. Those cards have not been as strong as a lot of people might have thought, including myself. And maybe they'll get there in the future, but currently, Legions is the only remotely playable, competitively, Poland deck. And even then, it's not that popular. It's not that strong. It's pretty versatile. You can run it with essentially any nation, major nation. But Legions is the only thing. You never think, oh, do I want to maybe pick Poland ally for this control deck? No, you never say that. You just, do I want to play Legions, yes or no? If the answer is yes, you pick Poland, and only Poland, and if the answer is no, you don't pick Poland ever. So that's why it's B tier. It's just very straightforward nation. It's not because Legions is bad, it's just because Legions is the only thing it can do. Next, I'm going to do Italy. And now this might surprise people, because if you're looking at what's still on the board, and especially if you remember back in like the peak of the Italy ally control meta, now Italy obviously has some very powerful cards. The Bologna Regiment has received, the nerf has definitely taken it out of the meta. As popular as it used to be, Decisive Defense is a pretty fair card, but Mare Nostrum, Lion for a Day, Decima, these are very powerful cards, and they are sort of the cornerstone of these Italy ally control decks. Soviet main control decks have sort of switched allies around. However, German Italy is the classic. Italy really enables Germany. It makes up for the things it is lacking, because Germany has no guards and Germany has no healing, and Italy ally offers really good guards and really good healing. And the reason it's here is very similar to the reason Poland is here. However, I think Italy is miles ahead of Poland. I mean, I honestly could do something like this. However, I think it's a little unfair to put Japan down in C tier. But the reason I have Italy here is it doesn't have a lot outside of Italy control, and Italy control ally is becoming increasingly replaceable because the nerfs are piling up. I mean, the nerf to Bologna Regiment, the first, like, 2 nerfs to Mare Nostrum. I think the most recent change to Mare Nostrum was actually a buff. But yeah, the nerf to Bologna Regiment, the nerf to Lion for a Day, just generally, Italy has not gotten anything new in quite some time, other than the 7th Alpini was a very powerful card, and a very powerful option. But, again, it just supports the same deck, and the nerf to L640 killed essentially the only... and the nerf to Fiat killed the only other Italy ally nations, because Italy has some interesting aggressive cards there, but not quite enough. And Italy has some interesting, like, mill control stuff with, not Call to the Colonies, the Italian 1-cost, the player with more units in their hand draws 2 cards, Pact of Steel. is another like interesting mill mechanic. So they have some interesting mechanics in Italy, which I would already put them ahead of the ones in Poland because I think they're already more viable and interesting than Poland. Um, However, it's just not quite there. So that's why I have Italy down in B tier. And ahead of Italy, still in B tier though, I'm going to put France. Actually, scratch that. I'm going to put France up in A tier. And this is for a few reasons. So I think France, out of the three minor nation ally only, I think France is arguably the strongest. Now, there's going to be some people who might push back on that, and that's fair because it's definitely a hot conversation as to what is better, France or Italy, in terms of just its peak performance in a deck. Like, is Soviet France better than German Italy control? Those are sort of the two flagships of those nations, and that's a very interesting conversation to have. However, outside of that, if you then look at what other decks France is in, it's a very wide range. So you have Britain-France Mobilize, you have Britain-France Resistance, Japan-France Resistance, so you have the Resistance packages, you have the Mobilize packages, the Soviet France control deck, so using it mainly for the Rima and the Call to the Colonies, so there's more of just like a straightforward unit-based control package. Then you have Unitless, which uses it for all of its removal, the US-France Unitless deck. Then you have the German-France Burn deck that is using France for its impressive draw and burn capabilities. So, France has a ton of options. Now, not all of them are like tier 1. Really, only Soviet France is tier 1, but the number of like tier 2 options that France gives is huge. I think France is a perfect example of what these minor nations should aspire to be, where they have these powerful cards that are not oppressive in the same way Mare Nostrum was quite oppressive at its peak. However, it's just a wide variety of very good cards that can be used and support a very wide range of archetypes across a wide range of main nations. So yeah, that is why I have France up in A tier. I think it's just very, very powerful as an option. It's very possible to be building a deck and think, do I want to do France ally with this deck? And I'm not sure that's quite as possible with the other two minor nation ally only. Next, we are going to do Soviet. And honestly, I was thinking about doing Soviet up here. I think I might put Soviet down in B tier, actually, going a little bit out of order. Because Soviet as a main nation has some really, really powerful elites. And I think it's more fair to put it up here. I think France, I'm still going to put France ahead, because what holds Soviet back is not the main nation Soviet options. Main nation Soviets, not a wide variety of options, especially with the nerfs to self-damage. And, I mean, Ardy's sticking around for a while. Tokens has been on the back foot for a long time. It's really just like bouncing back between different types of Soviet control. But Soviets has some incredibly powerful elites, maybe even the best elites in the game. And they have some very good options that are sitting behind France. I think like France has a lot of tier 2 options, the Soviet has a lot of tier 3 options. But what really holds Soviet back is Soviets as a ally nation. Now, we have seen increasing Soviet ally nation decks, specifically for Scorched Earth, Bryansk Regiment, and Spy Ring. However, I think this is, one, I think none of these decks are particularly good, and two, I think this is somewhat of a crutch if you are using this to argue that Soviets is a really good minor nation. Because I think the odds that Spy Ring and Scorched Earth survive like a year of rotation and balance changes, I think is kind of laughable at best. Maybe Spy Ring sticks around, but I think Scorched Earth is 100% going to be rotated or nerfed. That card is way too powerful. And like Bryansk Regiment's a very meh card. Like, it's a very powerful card, but I mean, it's a card that's very easily replaced by something else. It's not like you were running Soviets exclusively for Bryansk Regiments. So with that in mind, I think Soviets, it's very, very powerful, but I think I just have to put it behind France because of its lack of versatility. It's just very, very rigid in terms of what it does, and every Soviet deck, at least every Soviet control deck, which is the only viable Soviet decks at the moment. I mean, you look at it and it has like the same 25 cards. It's just like the same Soviet control package, and then you just rotate in and out 12 ally cards, and then like maybe 1 or 2 flex cards. Then we are going to have USA topping out A tier. USA is sort of the opposite problem of Soviets, because the USA has really, really remarkably terrible elites. Now, obviously, there's a couple of really, really good elites in USA. Strategic Bombing's quite powerful, USA Research, arguably the best research, and Skytrain, really, really good in mid-range, and also can be fine in ramp situations if you could get it behind a guard early and then use it to contest, use the units that it spawns to contest the front line against aggressive decks. However, the USA has the highest percentage of just absolute trash elites. Maybe slightly ahead of Japan, but like I feel like Japan's elites aren't just trashy; they're more just like fine cards and archetypes that are not good. Whereas US just has a bunch of bad cards that you're never gonna run, like Long Tom. And that holds US back quite a bit. Now, obviously, the US has the flagship deck for the nation, USA German Frontline. This deck is very, very powerful. Then it has a couple tier 2 decks sitting around, like US Soviet Ramp, US Britain Ramp, US Italy Ramp. I think those are all fine. You have US France Unitless, which I think is quite good. And all of those decks are sitting around, but where US really shines is as an ally nation, because you're going to have Britain US Air, you have German US Heinz, you have Britain US or Soviet US Ramp, and then you also have Soviet US Arty. US is just a very, very flexible nation as an ally, because you can bring in the ramp cards, you can bring in the tempo-based mid-range cards, you can bring in like these very specific cards that buff the support line, like 10th Engineers, Greyhound, and these can be used in RD decks, bomber decks, fighter decks, and then you also have stuff that buffs things going to the front line, and you have Greyhound, which is really good at getting into the front line, so this is going to buff aggressive decks, Heinz in particular, with Greyhound being a tank. So yeah, US just has a very, very wide range of ally nation options. And not to even mention, like, its ability to be run in tokens, or Japan, US decks for Unity's strength with, like, infantry-based styles. US just has so many really, really powerful and interesting options that support, honestly, arguably the widest variety of decks out of any nation in the game, which is why USA is up here. But a lot of these decks are tier 2, and a lot of these decks, is the cards that shine most are the main nation cards, not the US cards. The US is just a really good support to that, which is why it's down in A tier. The last two nations, I don't think this is going to be much of a surprise, or at least I think this is going to be the least surprising part of this video, is we have Britain and Germany left. And I'm going to put Britain up here first. And, I mean, what is there to say about Britain? They have Monty, they have Shelling, they have Pioneer Regiment, there's Britain Air, there's Brit US Ramp, there's Brit Poland Control, there's Brit Italy Control, Brit US Ramp. There's so many Britain Control options with these powerful cards. But then there's also Brit Mobilize. There's so many flavors of Brit Air. And Britain doesn't have the most variety of major nation decks. Because, I mean, out of the tier 1 ones, it's really just Brit Japan Air and Brit US Air. And, oh, sorry, I actually completely forgot about Discard momentarily. Brit Discard Handlock has been pretty new in the meta, but it's showing to be very, very powerful. And of course, there's Credit Denial with Japan Ally, which I suppose is like a couple extra points for Japan Ally, but that falls into the same thing of Spyring, where you're running Japan Ally for like 2 cards. Britain is just very, very powerful, and then as an ally nation, now obviously there's German Brit Discard, where you're just running the same package, but in a German main. But also there's Soviet Britain, where you're running it for the Lend-Leases. Britain just offers really good card draw. It offers the supply shortages. It can offer very good guards in Seaforth, Gren Guards, Blackwatch. It could offer good board clears, as mentioned, supply shortage, but carpet bombing as well. Very powerful cards. And the reason it's not the best nation in the game, in my opinion, is because I think it's just somewhat held back in that the decks that it supports are the best decks in the game, but it's not a wide variety of decks. Now, it can support a wide variety of decks, but a lot of them are like sort of dropping off into tier 2, or are just variants of the same thing, where it's like Brit USA or Brit Japan era. They're good because there's 28 really powerful British cards. And last but not least, putting Germany up here in first of all nations. And I think if you think about this for some amount of time, I think it's hard to disagree with Germany being the best nation in the game. So if you look at just the German main nation decks that are viable, starting with the most aggressive, you have German US Heinz, but then coming in at tier 2, you have German Soviet, Heinz, aggro, whatever you want to call it, these sort of like very aggressive rush YOLO decks. You can still German US Heinz, but you can build that in a very aggressive no-win style, but you can also build that in a slower, you get some We Can Do It's in here, and you're sort of building up a board style of the deck. And then you get into the controls. You have German Britain discard, you have German Italy control. There's no-wins German US ramp tempo deck. I don't really know how else to describe it. You have the German France burn deck. You just have these wide variety of major nation decks that are all pretty powerful, especially Joe Italy Control and Joe US Heinz. These have been both tier 1 to like high tier 2 decks for a very long time, and they are built on a powerful core set of cards that I don't think you necessarily have to be as worried about a single nerf killing the deck forever in the same way you might have to worry about that in like a Spy Ring ramp or something like that. But then where it really shines is coming in as an ally, because Germany offers a lot. Because if you look Japan, German Feint Retreat, US German Frontline. These are both very powerful meta lists for the aggressive side of the game. And Germany 100% enables them. This is not picking Germany because it's the best of the bunch and they kind of synergize with like the very powerful core set of cards. You're picking Germany because it enables them. You have a Rado to draw the Feint Retreat. You have 35 Ts, which just its synergy with the 7 1-cost infantries in the Jago deck, or 8 1-cost infantries in the Jago deck is just insane. And then of course in Frontline, it's not quite as obvious, but it's still 35T with combat engineers with the 30 seconds. This is allowing you to reach the support line. Otherwise, just the US main part of the deck is so slow. You need Germany to give you that reach into the support line, but also to give you blitzkriegs for that reach to end the game. This is very, very core to the deck. We've seen decks try it without it, and it is hard. Like, if you think back to the US-Poland decks of the past, they were fine. They really were built around the power of California Regiment, and when that got the nerf, the deck just fell off. And it's US-German picking it back up because of the German cards. But aside from the aggro cards that work really good both in Major and Main Nation, because Heinz is using a lot of those similar cards, you have German control options with Britain German discard. Obviously, that's like one of the best decks in the game right now. But also Soviet German control. Germany can offer some of the best anti-aggro cards in the game with Flam Panzers, Readouts, Sudden Strikes. These cards can be built for just like these hard targeting decks that are going after decks like Air. But it can also be used in more of these heavier control styles with the discard package, where you're running Germany for 2 Annihilations, 2 Wolfpacks, 3 Case Yellows. And that is just the power of Germany, is there's so many wide variety of both main and ally nation decks that are all tier 1. Like, it has tier 1 aggro decks with both main and ally, and tier 1 control decks with both main and ally. And all of those are not based around like one particular card that will probably be nerfed in the future. That's just built around a huge collection of very, very powerful cards. So, with all that being said, this is my tier list. And what does this mean exactly? I don't think this means, oh, Germany needs to get hit with the nerf hammer. Because that's the amazing thing about Germany is it's not necessarily these super oppressive handful of broken cards. In the same way that it might feel like when you're playing against Britain. And also just came to my mind that I didn't mention, throwing that out there for both Germany and Britain, is the Britain-German commando stack using Reichsbank. But yeah, I do think this video suggests that Japan could use some love, specifically in supporting control options, and control options outside of elites. Because I think Japan should have a lot to offer as an ally nation for control. There's a couple cards out there that are fine, like Takasaki is fine, 61st Rifles Regiment is fine, Sendai is fine, Amphibious Assault, Empire of the Sun, these are all fine cards. But sort of the cards that make Japan control even remotely viable are all elites at the moment. So you're just never really going to pick Japan as an ally nation at the moment, but if they have, say, cards that help reduce the cost of expensive orders, or just more tempo cards, like tempo control units, I think that could be very good. Or if they have more aggressive units, but not necessarily aggressive on their own, but sort of like support units to support an aggressive style, sort of like think combat engineers-esque units, maybe that could help them see more Japan ally nations and aggro decks out there. Poland and Italy, I would just love to see more archetypes that are not just legions and Italy ally control. And then I think Soviet, France, USA, these nations are all in a very good spot. I think Germany's in a very good spot as well, just probably needs a little less love in the upcoming expansions. Just keep in mind that is a very powerful nation. And of course, Britain is a unique one because it has a wide variety of options that use very different cards and then a handful of very oppressive elites. And nerfing the elites isn't going to necessarily kill all of those decks, but it will bring them all down, and that's a bit of a problem, because if you nerf Monty and Chellin, yes, you're going to hurt Brit Air, but you're also going to hurt every single other Britain deck, and Brit Air is really the only other Britain deck that's a bit of a problem. Maybe Britain-German handlock. So, yeah, Britain, just careful what you give them in the future, and then tone down Cass. Please, 2 credit to Cass. Please, just put Cass to 2 credits. Please. But with that, that is going to be it for this video. Let me know your thoughts on this tier list. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Feel free to make your own. A link to the tier list to make your own is going to be in the description. And feel free to share it on my Discord. There is a channel just for people to share their tier lists, with more links there to make your own tier lists. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.